Imagine a universe where humanity is seen as nothing more than primitive savages, barely worthy of recognition by the great galactic powers. Picture a council of ancient alien races, each commanding fleets that could glass entire star systems, dismissing Earth's desperate plea for membership with cruel laughter. Now imagine their faces when one human, a single Navy SEAL armed with nothing but his training, his wits, and an unbreakable will, proves that sometimes the most dangerous weapon in the universe isn't advanced technology or overwhelming firepower. Sometimes it's the refusal to quit when everyone else would have given up. This is the story of Marcus Ghost Reeves, the man who made the galaxy's most powerful beings learn a hard truth: never underestimate a species that conquered their own world before they even learned to fly between the stars. What happens when unstoppable human determination meets immovable alien arrogance? The Council is about to find out. Get ready for a tale where one soldier's impossible mission will reshape the galaxy's understanding of what it truly means to be human. The crystalline halls of the Galactic Council echoed with the sound of derision. Ambassador Sarah Chin stood alone at the center of the massive chamber, her small human form dwarfed by the towering representatives of 12 ancient civilizations. Each species had earned their place through millennia of conquest, technological advancement, or sheer longevity. Humanity had been trying to earn theirs for 3 decades. The Vorthak representative, a being that resembled a cross between a praying mantis and a cathedral spire, clicked its mandibles in what passed for amusement among its kind. Humans, it said, its voice a harmony of chittering sounds translated by the universal communicators, you speak of your species' potential, yet you have barely left your own solar system. Your longest journey was to your outer planets. We traverse galaxies. Sarah maintained her composure, though her hands clenched at her sides. She had prepared for this moment her entire diplomatic career. Honored Counselor Zethkree, humanity may be young compared to your ancient civilizations, but we have proven our determination time and again. We've survived ice ages, world wars, pandemics, and disasters that would have ended lesser species. We ask not for charity, but for the chance to prove ourselves worthy of council membership. A sound like grinding metal filled the chamber as the Cornathic delegate laughed. The silicon-based lifeform's mountainous bulk shifted on its platform, causing tremors through the floor. Determination, it rumbled. Child species, we have watched civilizations rise and fall for eons. Your determination is merely the thrashing of a drowning primitive who refuses to accept their limitations. The ethereal collective's representative floated serenely above its designated space, a being of pure energy contained within a gossamer shell. When it spoke, its voice resonated directly in the minds of those present. The humans request trials to prove their worth. This is quaint. Tell us, small diplomat, what trial could your species possibly pass that would demonstrate value to beings who have mastered time itself? Sarah straightened her shoulders. Earth's government had anticipated this question. We proposed the trial of the Crucible. Send one human to face whatever challenge the Council deems appropriate. If they succeed, grant humanity provisional membership. If they fail, we will cease our requests for 50 standard galactic years. The chamber fell silent. The trial of the Crucible was legendary among Council species. It was not a test of technology or firepower, but of pure capability. The last species to attempt it, the Melkari Empire, had sent their greatest warrior 3 centuries ago. His remains were still displayed in the Council Museum as a reminder of the price of hubris. Councillor Vrex of the Draconic Hegemony uncoiled from his perch, his serpentine form stretching nearly 40 feet in length. Scales that had witnessed the birth and death of stars glittered in the chamber's light. You would stake your species' future on a single individual? How typically human. Very well. We accept this proposal, if only to settle the matter permanently. The other council members murmured their agreement. Counselor Zethkree's mandibles clicked rapidly in anticipation. The trial will be simple in concept, impossible in execution. Your champion must infiltrate and disable the Nexus Station. Sarah's blood went cold. Every spacefaring species knew of the Nexus Station. It was the Council's most heavily fortified facility, a massive structure that served as both a military installation and a testing ground for new defense technologies. It was defended by the combined military might of all 12 Council species, protected by energy shields that could repel entire fleets, and staffed by the most elite warriors the galaxy had to offer.
The Nexus Station? Sarah managed to keep her voice steady. That's not a trial, that's suicide. The Cornathic delegate's laugh shook dust from the ceiling. Precisely.
Perhaps this will teach your species the virtue of knowing one's place in the cosmic order. The ethereal representative's mental voice carried notes of cold amusement. To clarify the parameters, your champion must infiltrate the station, reach the central command core, and deactivate the primary defense grid. They must do this alone, with only equipment that your species has naturally developed. No console technology, no assistance, no backup. Furthermore, Vrex added with predatory satisfaction, they will have exactly 72 standard hours to complete the task before the station's automated defense protocols activate a purge sequence. Failure means death, and your species' request for council membership will be denied for the next 500 years instead of 50. Sarah felt the weight of humanity's future pressing down on her shoulders. She thought of Earth, of the billions of humans looking to the stars with hope and wonder. She thought of the colonies struggling to establish themselves on distant worlds, of the scientists and explorers who dreamed of standing alongside the galaxy's great civilizations as equals. I need to consult with my government, she said finally. Of course, Vrex replied with mock generosity. You have 1 standard week to provide your champion or withdraw your request. Choose wisely, human. The galaxy is watching. As the council session ended and the representatives dispersed to their respective quarters, Sarah stood alone in the vast chamber. The weight of impossibility settled around her like a shroud. How could she return to Earth and tell them that humanity's dreams of galactic citizenship hinged on a single person successfully completing what was essentially a death sentence? 3 days later, Sarah found herself in a secure communication chamber aboard her diplomatic vessel, staring at the holographic display showing Earth's United Government Council in emergency session. President Martinez leaned forward, his weathered face grave with concern. Ambassador Chen, you're telling us that the Galactic Council wants us to send 1 person on a suicide mission to prove our worth? That's an accurate assessment, Mr. President. The Nexus Station is considered impregnable. No one has ever successfully infiltrated it, let alone disabled its primary systems. Secretary of Defense Williams, a former Marine general, studied the tactical data Sarah had managed to gather. What kind of defenses are we looking at? Sarah pulled up the intelligence reports. Multi-layered energy shields, automated defense platforms, over 10,000 security personnel from various council species, environmental hazards designed to kill intruders, and surveillance systems that can detect a heartbeat from 3 kilometers away. The station itself is roughly the size of Manhattan and extends both above and below the dimensional plane it occupies. It's impossible, declared Dr. Rebecca Hayes, Earth's chief scientist. We're being set up to fail. This isn't a trial, it's an execution disguised as diplomacy. President Martinez was quiet for a long moment. What does our psychological profile suggest about the Council's motivations? Dr. Elizabeth Warren, Earth's leading xenopsychologist, consulted her notes. Based on our interactions, I believe they genuinely expect us to fail and withdraw our application. This trial serves multiple purposes for them. It eliminates the human problem from their agenda, demonstrates their superiority to any other species considering council membership, and provides entertainment for beings who have lived for millennia. So they want a show, Secretary Williams mused. The question is, do we give them one? The debate continued for hours, with various officials arguing for and against accepting the trial. Some believed it was a trap designed to humiliate humanity permanently. Others saw it as the only chance Earth would have for generations to gain recognition among the galactic powers. Finally, President Martinez called for silence. The question isn't whether we can win. The question is whether we can afford not to try. Our colonies are struggling, our resources are limited, and our expansion into space is moving at a crawl compared to what we could accomplish with Council support. If we withdraw now, we condemn our children and grandchildren to remain isolated in our corner of the galaxy while the rest of the universe passes us by. But who could we possibly send?
Dr. Hayes asked. This mission would require skills that no single human possesses.
They'd need to be a master infiltrator, a technological genius, a combat expert, and have the mental fortitude to operate alone under impossible pressure. Secretary Williams had been unusually quiet during this part of the discussion. Now he looked up with an expression that Sarah recognized from her study of human military history. It was the look of a commander who had just remembered a particular weapon in his arsenal. Actually, he said slowly, I might know someone. 2 days later, Marcus Ghost Reeves stood in the briefing room deep beneath the Pentagon, studying the holographic display of the Nexus station with the same intensity he'd once used to memorize terrorist compounds in Afghanistan. At 35, he was a 20-year veteran of the Navy SEALs, with a service record that was mostly classified and entirely legendary among those with sufficient clearance to read it.
His callsign wasn't ironic.
Marcus had earned the name Ghost through an uncanny ability to move unseen through any environment, to appear where enemies least expected him, and to vanish when pursuit seemed certain. He had penetrated facilities that intelligence agencies swore were impregnable, eliminated targets that other units couldn't even locate, and completed missions that existed in files marked with security classifications that officially didn't exist. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Marcus said, his voice calm and measured. You want me to break into an alien fortress that's never been successfully infiltrated, disable their primary defense systems, and do it all without backup or support, while being hunted by 10,000 alien security forces, all to prove that humanity deserves a seat at the galactic big kids table. General Patterson, who had been Marcus's commanding officer for the past 8 years, nodded grimly.
That's about the size of it. And, before you ask, yes, it's voluntary. No one would blame you if you walked away from this one. Marcus continued studying the station schematics.
His training kicked in automatically, identifying potential entry points, escape routes, and tactical considerations. It was a habit born from 2 decades of operations where such analysis meant the difference between mission success and a flag-draped coffin. What's the intelligence picture look like? He asked. Agent Sarah Kim from the CIA's Alien Intelligence Division activated another series of displays.
Frustratingly limited.
We know the station has 12 distinct security zones, each designed by a different council species according to their particular strengths.
The Vortex sections focus on biomimetic sensors and automated responses.
The Cornathic areas rely on gravitational anomalies and massive kinetic barriers. The ethereal zones use psychic detection and energy-based defenses.
Weaknesses? That's the problem.
Each zone's defenses are designed to cover the weaknesses of the others. What might work against human-designed security would be useless against alien systems we don't fully understand.
Marcus nodded slowly.
This was the kind of impossible mission that had defined his career. The kind where success depended not on having a perfect plan, but on being able to adapt when every plan inevitably fell apart.
Equipment restrictions?
General Patterson consulted his briefing notes. Only technology that humanity has naturally developed.
No council tech, no reverse-engineered alien systems. Basically, if we didn't invent it ourselves, you can't use it. Timeline? 72 hours from insertion to completion.
If you haven't disabled the defense grid by then, the station initiates something called a purge protocol that kills everything organic within its structure. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, running scenarios in his head. Finally, he looked up at the assembled officials.
I have 3 questions. First, what happens to humanity if I fail?
Our application for council membership gets denied for 500 years instead of 50, Agent Kim answered.
Effectively, it means our great-great-grandchildren might get another chance. Second question, what happens to humanity if I succeed?
General Patterson leaned forward.
Provisional council membership. Access to galactic trade routes, advanced technologies, scientific exchange, and protection under council law.
It would transform our entire species' future.
Third question, who else is crazy enough to try this if I say no?
The room fell silent. After a moment, General Patterson spoke quietly.
Son, there isn't anyone else. If you can't do it, it can't be done. Marcus stood up and walked to the window overlooking the Potomac River.
Somewhere beyond Earth's atmosphere, Ambassador Chen was waiting for his decision. Somewhere beyond that, 12 alien civilizations were already preparing for humanity's humiliation and failure. He thought about his daughter Emma, who was studying astrophysics at MIT with dreams of exploring distant worlds. He thought about the colonies struggling to survive on Mars and Europa, held back by technological limitations that Council membership could solve overnight. He thought about humanity's potential, constrained by the prejudices of species who saw Earth as nothing more than a curiosity. "When do I leave?" he asked. General Patterson's relief was visible. "Transport leaves for the Council station in 6 hours. You'll have that time to review all available intelligence and select your equipment." "One more thing," Marcus said, turning back to face the room. "I want a message sent to the Galactic Council. Tell them that Petty Officer Marcus Reeves of the United States Navy SEALs accepts their challenge. And tell them that when I complete this mission, I expect them to honor their agreement." Agent Kim looked puzzled. "Petty Officer?" "Sir, your actual rank is," Marcus smiled, and, for the first time since entering the briefing room, he looked genuinely amused. "My actual rank is classified at a level that would require alien security clearance to discuss. As far as the Council needs to know, I'm just a regular Navy SEAL." Let them underestimate what that means. As Marcus left the briefing room to prepare for humanity's most important mission, none of the officials present could know that they had just witnessed the last moment when the Galactic Council would have the luxury of laughing at humanity. In 72 hours, their laughter would die, replaced by something no council member had felt toward humans before: respect tinged with a healthy dose of fear. The ghost was going to war, and the galaxy was about to learn why humans had conquered their own planet before they even learned to reach for the stars. The transport ship Endeavour hung in the void like a metal sculpture against the star field, its human design crude and angular compared to the flowing, organic curves of the council vessels surrounding it. Marcus stood in the observation deck, watching as the Nexus station grew larger in the viewport. Even at a distance of 50,000 kilometers, the structure was intimidating. The station resembled a massive flower made of crystalline metal and exotic matter, its 12 petals extending outward from a central hub. Each petal belonged to a different council species, their architectural styles creating a bizarre fusion of organic curves, geometric precision, and physics-defying constructions. Energy barriers shimmered between the sections like soap bubbles made of lightning, and weapon platforms drifted in lazy orbits around the entire structure. First time seeing it up close? Ambassador Chen had approached quietly, her diplomatic training making her footsteps nearly silent on the deck plates. "First time seeing anything like it," Marcus replied without taking his eyes from the station. "Intelligence photos don't do it justice. It's beautiful, in a terrifying sort of way." Chen studied his profile. Despite having worked with military personnel for years, she found Marcus difficult to read. There was a stillness about him that went beyond professional calm. It was the kind of quiet confidence she had only seen in people who had faced death so often that it had become just another operational parameter. "Are you having second thoughts?" she asked. Marcus finally turned to look at her. "Ma'am, with respect, second thoughts are a luxury I gave up about 15 years and 40 missions ago. Once you accept an operation, you commit completely or you don't come home. But this isn't like your other missions. You're used to having intelligence support, backup teams, extraction plans. This time, you're truly alone." Marcus's smile was barely visible. "Ambassador, with respect, every mission I've ever been on, when it really counted, I was alone. That's what SEALs train for. That's what the name means." Chen was about to ask what he meant when Captain Rodriguez's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. "Attention all personnel. We are approaching the insertion point. Ambassador Chen and Petty Officer Reeves, please report to the briefing room for final mission parameters." The briefing room was cramped by necessity. Council regulations required that human vessels remain at least 50,000 kilometers from the Nexus station during the trial period. This meant Marcus would need to cross the distance using a small insertion craft that could avoid the station's long-range sensors. Captain Rodriguez activated the tactical display, showing a three-dimensional map of the space around the station. We've identified what appears to be a sensor shadow created by the interaction of the various energy fields surrounding the station. If you approach from bearing 27 Mark IV, there's a narrow corridor that should keep you invisible to their detection grid. Marcus studied the approach vector. What's the margin for error? About 50 meters on either side. Drift outside that corridor and you'll light up their sensors like a Christmas tree. And the insertion craft? Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh, the Endeavour's chief engineer, pulled up specifications for the modified escape pod they had prepared for him. We stripped out everything non-essential and fitted it with the most advanced stealth coating our technology can produce. It's essentially a coffin with a guidance system, but it should get you to the station undetected. Marcus examined the craft's specifications. No weapons, minimal life support, no communication system, and barely enough propulsion to make course corrections. Once he launched, he would be completely cut off from any form of support or assistance. Landing options? Captain Rodriguez highlighted several areas on the station's exterior. These maintenance ports appear to be the least defended entry points. However, we have no information about what lies beyond them. Ambassador Chen leaned forward. Marcus, I have to ask one more time. Are you absolutely certain about this? The Council made it clear that once you board that station, there's no extraction. You either complete the mission or you die trying. Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering her words. Ambassador, let me tell you what I think this is really about. The Council isn't testing whether one human can infiltrate their station. They're testing whether humanity as a species has the kind of people who would even try. They want to know if we're the kind of species that backs down when faced with impossible odds, or if we're the kind that says challenge accepted and figures out how to win anyway. He stood up and began gathering his equipment. Every species in the Council earned their place somehow. The Vortak conquered half a galaxy through superior tactics. The Kornathi built weapons that could crack planets. The Ethereals transcended physical limitations through pure force of will. The question is, what's humanity's special talent? And, you think you know the answer? Chen asked. Marcus shouldered his pack and headed for the door. Ambassador, I think we're the species that refuses to lose. Even when we should. Especially when we should. 2 hours later, Marcus floated in the cramped confines of the insertion craft as it drifted through space toward the Nexus station. The craft's passive sensors showed him closing distance with his target, but he couldn't risk any active scanning that might alert the station's defense grid. His equipment was spread around him in the pod's limited space, every item chosen for maximum utility and minimum weight. His rifle was a modified M4 using caseless ammunition to avoid leaving brass traces. His sidearm was a ceramic composite pistol that wouldn't show up on most scanner types. He carried enough explosives to level a city block, all disguised as routine electronic components. But his most important tools were less tangible. 2 decades of training had turned him into something that didn't quite exist in Council databases, a predator specifically evolved to hunt in the kind of high-tech, high-security environment that other species used to feel safe. The craft's proximity alarm chimed softly, indicating he was approaching the station's outer perimeter. Marcus activated the final approach sequence and felt the pod adjust its trajectory toward the maintenance port he had selected as his entry point. As the massive structure filled his viewport, Marcus could see details that had been invisible from a distance. The station's hull was covered in millions of sensor nodes, each one a mechanical eye watching for any sign of intrusion. Weapon platforms hung in the void like sleeping predators, their targeting systems sweeping back and forth in complex patterns. The maintenance port he was approaching appeared to be designed for automated repair drones. It was barely large enough for a human, which had probably never occurred to the alien architects. The port's access hatch was sealed with what appeared to be an energy barrier rather than a physical lock. Marcus waited until his craft was less than 10 meters from the port before activating his infiltration gear. The first device he deployed was something that would have been instantly recognizable to any human electronic warfare specialist but was completely outside the Council's technological paradigm, an electromagnetic pulse generator tuned specifically to disrupt energy barriers. The barrier flickered and died just as his craft made contact with the station's hull. Marcus had exactly 30 seconds before the station's automated systems detected the barrier failure and investigated. He abandoned the insertion craft and squeezed through the maintenance port, sealing it behind him just as emergency lighting began flashing in the corridor beyond. He found himself in a narrow service tunnel that stretched away into darkness in both directions. The tunnel was clearly designed for drone maintenance, with power conduits and data cables running along the walls and ceiling. Emergency lighting provided just enough illumination to reveal that the tunnel curved away beyond his vision in both directions. Marcus consulted his mental map of the station. According to the intelligence he had studied, he needed to reach the central hub, which was approximately 12 kilometers from his current position. The most direct route would take him through at least 4 different security zones, each designed by a different alien species according to their particular defensive philosophy. He chose to move toward what his briefing materials had identified as the Vortex section. The insectoid aliens were known for their analytical approach to security, relying on sophisticated sensors and automated response systems. It would be challenging, but it was a type of challenge he understood. The tunnel gradually widened as he moved deeper into the station, and soon he found himself in a maintenance bay large enough to stand upright. The bay was filled with equipment he didn't recognize, but the principles were universal enough that he could identify power distribution nodes, data processing centers, and environmental control systems. What he hadn't expected was the sound of approaching footsteps. Marcus immediately moved to the darkest corner of the bay and activated his optical camouflage system. The device used advanced metamaterials to bend light around his body, rendering him effectively invisible to most detection methods. It was cutting-edge human technology, but the power consumption meant he could only use it for short periods. 3 figures entered the bay, and Marcus got his first close look at Vortex security personnel. They were even more insectoid than he had expected, standing nearly 8 feet tall on 4 legs, with 2 arms that ended in manipulator claws and heads that seemed to be all compound eyes and clicking mandibles. Their movements were precise and coordinated, suggesting a hive mind or at least highly developed group consciousness. The lead Vortex moved to a control panel and began manipulating symbols that flowed across its surface like living text. The other 2 spread out through the bay, their heads rotating in ways that human anatomy couldn't match as they scanned for any signs of intrusion. Marcus remained perfectly still as one of the aliens passed within arm's reach of his position. He could hear the clicking of its mandibles and the software of its breathing apparatus. The alien paused directly in front of him, its head tilting in what might have been confusion. For a moment, Marcus thought he had been detected. Then, he realized what was happening. The Vortex sensors were picking up something, but they were designed to detect known intrusion methods. They could sense that something was wrong, but they couldn't identify what it was because nothing in their database matched the signature of human stealth technology. After several minutes of searching, the aliens departed, their mandibles clicking in what sounded like frustrated conversation. Marcus waited another 10 minutes before disabling his camouflage and moving deeper into the station. The maintenance tunnels led him through a maze of corridors and service areas, each section revealing new aspects of the station's incredible complexity. He passed through atmospheric processing centers that maintained breathable air for dozens of different species, power generation facilities that seemed to operate on principles that violated several laws of physics, and data centers that processed information at rates that would have overwhelmed Earth's most powerful computers. As he moved deeper into the Vortex section, the security measures became more sophisticated. Motion detectors tracked movement through the corridors, bioscanners analyzed air samples for foreign proteins, and automated defense turrets watched key intersections with targeting systems that could track multiple targets simultaneously. Marcus adapted his tactics accordingly. He moved during shift changes when the automated systems briefly recalibrated. He used HVAC ducts to bypass motion detectors. He employed chemical scrubbers to eliminate his biological signature. Most importantly, he moved with the patience of a hunter who understood that speed was less important than avoiding detection. 6 hours into the mission, he reached the boundary between the Vortex section and the Kornathi zone. The transition was immediately apparent. Where the Vortak had favored technological solutions, the Kornathi relied on brute force and overwhelming defensive measures. The corridor ahead of him was filled with gravitational anomalies that would crush an intruder instantly if they stepped in the wrong place. Energy barriers sparked and crackled with enough power to vaporize anything that touched them. The walls themselves seemed to be moving, shifting their configuration in patterns that would confuse anyone trying to map the area. Marcus studied the defensive layout for nearly an hour before he identified the pattern. The Kornathi were silicon-based lifeforms who thought in geological timescales. Their defenses changed, but they changed slowly and predictably. If he could time his movements correctly, he could navigate through the barriers during their reconfiguration cycles. The next 2 hours were the most dangerous of the mission so far. Marcus had to time his movements to within seconds, diving through gaps in the gravitational fields just as they shifted, rolling under energy barriers during their brief power cycles, and climbing over moving wall sections before they completed their rotations. He made it through the Kornathi zone with less than 30 minutes to spare before the barriers reset to their maximum defensive configuration. Behind him, the corridor sealed itself with gravitational forces that would have flattened him into a molecular layer on the floor. The ethereal section was different again. Here, the defenses were subtle and psychological. The corridors seemed normal at first glance, but, as Marcus moved through them, he began to experience disorientation that went beyond anything physical. His sense of direction became unreliable. Time seemed to slow down and speed up randomly. Memories from his past began surfacing without warning, threatening to distract him from his mission. It took him nearly an hour to realize what was happening. The ethereals were using psychic defenses, attempting to confuse and disorient intruders by manipulating their perceptions and memories. It was a type of security that no human military had ever encountered, but Marcus's SEAL training had prepared him for psychological warfare in ways the aliens probably hadn't anticipated. He fell back on the mental discipline techniques he had learned during his survival training. Focus on immediate objectives. Control breathing to maintain clarity. Use physical sensations to anchor consciousness in reality. Most importantly, never trust perceptions that couldn't be verified through multiple senses. The ethereal zone took him 4 hours to navigate, not because of physical barriers but because of the constant mental effort required to maintain his sense of reality. By the time he reached the central hub, he was exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with physical fatigue. But he had made it. The central command core lay just ahead, protected by one final security system that combined elements from all 12 Council species. Marcus checked his chronometer. He had been in the station for 18 hours. 54 hours remained before the purge protocol activated. The real test was about to begin. The central hub of the Nexus station was a cathedral of alien engineering that defied human comprehension. Marcus crouched in the maintenance shaft overlooking the massive chamber, struggling to process what he was seeing. The space was roughly spherical and easily 300 meters in diameter. At its center hung a crystalline structure that pulsed with energy patterns that seemed to exist in more dimensions than his eyes could follow. That crystal was the heart of the station's defense grid, the control node that coordinated all of the security systems he had spent the last 18 hours circumventing. Surrounding it were 12 platforms, each one representing a different council species and containing control systems designed according to their unique technological approaches. But it wasn't the technology that made Marcus pause. It was the defenders. The chamber was occupied by what appeared to be an elite guard unit drawn from all 12 council species. He counted at least 50 individuals, each one clearly a specialist in their race's particular form of combat. Vortak warriors moved with insectoid precision, their biomechanical weapons integrated seamlessly with their bodies. Kornathi guards stood like living mountains, their stone-like skin providing natural armor that could probably stop tank rounds. Ethereal sentinels floated serenely around the chamber, their forms shifting between states of matter as they maintained psychic surveillance over the entire area. Draconic hegemony warriors coiled around support structures like living weapons, their scales shimmering with defensive energy fields. Marcus had infiltrated heavily defended facilities before, but nothing like this. These weren't ordinary security guards or even elite military units. These were representatives of species that had conquered star systems and survived for millennia.
Each one possessed capabilities that exceeded anything in human experience.
He spent 2 hours studying their patrol patterns, trying to identify weaknesses in their coverage. The aliens moved with a coordination that suggested shared consciousness or at least highly advanced communication systems.
When one guard moved to investigate a potential threat, others automatically adjusted their positions to maintain overlapping fields of observation.
Worse, the chamber itself was designed to eliminate stealth. The walls were covered with sensors that could detect everything from heat signatures to quantum fluctuations. The air was filled with scanning beams that would reveal any form of optical camouflage. Even the floor was equipped with pressure sensors sensitive enough to detect a mouse walking across it. Marcus was considering his options when his enhanced hearing picked up a sound that made his blood run cold, approaching footsteps in the maintenance shaft behind him. He turned to see 3 figures moving through the tunnel with fluid grace that marked them as something other than the species he had already encountered. As they moved closer, he could see that they were humanoid but clearly not human. Their skin had a metallic sheen, their eyes glowed with internal light, and they moved with a coordination that suggested cybernetic enhancement. These were members of the Nexari Collective, a species that had voluntarily merged with their technology to create perfect hybrid warriors. Marcus had read about them in the intelligence briefings, but seeing them in person was unsettling. They represented what humanity might become if they chose the path of complete technological integration. The lead Nexari paused at a junction in the maintenance shaft and turned its glowing eyes directly toward Marcus's hiding place. For a moment, he thought he had been detected. Then, the figure spoke in a voice that sounded like a harmony of electronic tones.
Biological signature confirmed.
Single human male, enhanced physical conditioning, carrying primitive kinetic weapons and electronic devices.
Analysis suggests military training consistent with Earth Special Operations protocols.
One of its companions tilted its head in what might have been curiosity.
Query: how did a single human penetrate our security perimeter?
Council intelligence suggests their species lacks the technological capability for such intrusion. The third Nexari consulted what appeared to be a data display projected directly into its visual field.
Theory: subject may represent previously unknown human capabilities.
Alternative theory: subject received assistance from unknown source. Marcus remained perfectly still, but his mind was racing. The Nexari weren't just detecting his presence, they were analyzing him in real time, building a threat assessment based on observations of his equipment and capabilities. This was intelligence gathering of a type that went far beyond anything he had encountered in his military career.
Decision: the lead Nexari announced. Subject will be captured for interrogation. Stunning weapons only.
Council directives specify that human must survive for trial completion verification. The 3 figures began moving toward his position with mechanical precision. Marcus realized that his stealth technology was useless against beings who could probably see across the entire electromagnetic spectrum and analyze data at computer speeds. He was going to have to fight his way out, and he was going to have to do it without alerting the guards in the central chamber. He waited until the lead Nexari was within arm's reach before moving. His first strike was a nerve pinch that would have incapacitated a human instantly. The effect on the cyborg was minimal. It stumbled slightly but immediately began adapting its defensive protocols to counter his attack.
Marcus rolled backward and drew his ceramic sidearm.
The weapon was designed to be undetectable by most scanner types, but he had no idea whether it would be effective against beings who were part machine. He targeted center mass and fired 3 rounds in quick succession.
The bullet struck the lead Nexari and seemed to be absorbed by its metallic skin without causing any visible damage. The creature looked down at the impact points with what might have been amusement. Analysis complete, it announced. Human weapons ineffective against enhanced physiology. Recommend immediate capture.
The other 2 Nexari moved to flank him, their movements coordinated with machine precision. Marcus realized that conventional tactics weren't going to work against opponents who could adapt to his methods in real time.
He needed to do something they couldn't predict or analyze.
He did something that went against every principle of stealth and infiltration he had ever learned. he shouted at the top of his lungs while simultaneously activating a flashbang grenade. The sudden noise and light overloaded the Nexary's enhanced senses, causing them to stumble backward as their systems struggled to filter the sensory input. More importantly, it triggered every alarm system in the central chamber. The elite guards below immediately went to maximum alert, spreading out through the chamber to search for the source of the disturbance. But they were looking for threats in the central area, not in the maintenance shafts above them. Marcus used the confusion to his advantage. He grabbed an explosive charge from his pack and attached it to the maintenance shaft wall. The explosion blew a hole directly into one of the control platforms, creating chaos as debris rained down on the guards below. He dropped through the hole and landed on the ethereal control platform just as the floating sentinels converged on his position. Up close, the ethereals were even more alien than he had expected. Their forms seemed to shift between solid matter and pure energy, making them impossible to target with conventional weapons. But Marcus wasn't trying to fight them. He was trying to reach the central control crystal, and the ethereal platform was the closest to his objective. He sprinted across the platform, dodging energy blasts from the other guard units while the ethereals attempted to trap him with psychic restraints. The mental assault was unlike anything he had experienced. The ethereals were trying to overwhelm his consciousness directly, flooding his mind with images of failure and despair. For a moment, he was back in Afghanistan, watching his squad die in an ambush he had been powerless to prevent. Then, he was a child again, hearing his parents argue about his future while he pretended to sleep. Marcus forced himself to remember his training. Pain is temporary, but quitting lasts forever. It was a SEAL motto, but more than that, it was a fundamental truth about human nature. Humans had evolved to endure suffering that would break other species. They had survived ice ages and plagues and wars by refusing to give up when giving up was the logical choice. He broke free of the psychic assault and leaped from the ethereal platform to the central crystal structure. The crystalline surface was warm to the touch and hummed with energy that made his bones ache. According to his briefing, he needed to find the primary control node and overload it with a specific sequence of electromagnetic pulses. The problem was that the control node was protected by energy barriers and defensive systems that activated the moment he touched the crystal surface. Plasma bolts erupted from hidden emplacements while force fields tried to push him away from the critical components. Below him, the elite guards were converging on the central structure. He could see Vorthak warriors scaling the crystal surface with their clawed appendages while Kornathi guards positioned heavy weapons to bring him down. The ethereals were maintaining psychic pressure that made it difficult to think clearly, and he could hear the mechanical voices of the Nexary as they coordinated a capture attempt. Marcus realized he had perhaps 30 seconds before the guards reached him. The control node was protected by 3 separate security systems, each one requiring a different type of technological key to access. He had human-designed tools that could theoretically breach the defenses, but not in the time he had remaining. That's when he remembered something from his briefing that he had initially dismissed as irrelevant. The station's designers had built multiple redundancies into every system, including manual override capabilities for emergency situations. The control node could be accessed directly if the operator had the correct biological signature. The problem was that the acceptable signatures were limited to the 12 Council species. Humans weren't in the database because humanity wasn't part of the Council. But Marcus was no ordinary human. 20 years of SEAL operations had exposed him to chemical treatments, radiation therapy, genetic modification, and cybernetic enhancements that pushed the boundaries of human physiology. He was still recognizably human, but he was human pushed to the absolute limits of what the species could achieve. He placed his palm on the central control interface and hoped that his modified biology would be close enough to one of the Council species to trigger the manual override. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the crystal surface began to glow with patterns that seemed to flow through his nervous system like liquid fire. The control node was scanning his biology, comparing it to the genetic templates in its database. The Vorthak warriors were less than 10 meters away when the control interface accepted his biological signature and granted him access to the station's primary systems. What happened next would be debated by xenobiologists for generations. The control node had apparently classified Marcus's enhanced human physiology as a variant of the Terran genetic template, a classification that existed in Council databases but had never been activated because no species had ever been found that matched the theoretical parameters. Marcus found himself with complete access to the station's defense grid, communication systems, life support, and weapons control.
The irony wasn't lost on him.
The Council had designed their ultimate security system to be accessible only to their own species, never imagining that a human could be genetically modified enough to trigger the override. He began shutting down the defense systems in sequence, starting with the energy barriers that protected the station from external attack.
Alarms began blaring throughout the facility as critical systems went offline.
The elite guards stopped their advance, realizing that capturing him was now irrelevant. He already had control of their most secure facility. But Marcus wasn't finished. As he worked through the station's systems, he discovered something that the Council had never mentioned during their negotiations with humanity.
The Nexus station wasn't just a defensive installation.
It was also a weapon. The facility had the capability to project energy barriers around entire star systems, effectively quarantining any species the Council deemed dangerous. It could disable starships at interstellar distances, manipulate gravitational fields to destroy planets, and even alter the fundamental constants of physics within localized space. This wasn't a defensive measure. It was a tool for ensuring that no species could ever challenge the Council's authority, no matter how advanced they became. The trial wasn't just about testing humanity's capabilities, it was about demonstrating that even their best couldn't threaten the Council's ultimate weapon. Marcus looked down at the elite guards who had stopped their assault and were now watching him with expressions that ranged from amazement to horror. He realized that none of them had expected him to get this far. The trial was supposed to end with his death or capture, not with him gaining control of their most powerful weapon. He activated the station's communication system and opened a channel to the Galactic Council chambers, where he knew the 12 representatives were waiting for news of his inevitable failure. "This is Petty Officer Marcus Reeves of the United States Navy SEALs," he said, his voice echoing through speakers throughout the station. "I have successfully infiltrated the Nexus station and gained control of its primary defense grid.
The trial conditions have been met."
The response came immediately, transmitted on a frequency that reached not just the Council chambers but every major population center in Council space. It was the voice of Counselor Vrex of the Draconic Hegemony, and, for the first time since humanity had encountered the Council, the ancient dragon sounded genuinely surprised.
"Impossible.
No single individual could penetrate our defenses and compromise the Nexus station." Marcus smiled as he looked out at the elite guards who were still staring at him in disbelief.
"Respectfully, Counselor, you should probably update your threat assessments. And, while I have your attention, there's something else we need to discuss."
The chamber fell silent. Marcus was no longer just a human trying to prove his species' worth. He was a human with his finger on the trigger of the galaxy's most powerful weapon, and everyone involved was suddenly very interested in what he had to say. "It seems your Nexus station has some capabilities that weren't mentioned during our negotiations. I think it's time for a more honest conversation about what Council membership really means." The silence stretched on for several moments before Counselor Vrex spoke again, his voice carefully controlled.
"What do you propose, human?"
Marcus looked around the chamber at the elite guards who represented the pinnacle of 12 different civilizations. Then, he did something that would be remembered in Council history for millennia to come.
He laughed.
"What I propose, Counselor, is that you stop thinking of humanity as a species asking for permission to join your club. I suggest you start thinking of us as the species you really don't want as an enemy."
The revolution was about to begin.
The silence that followed Marcus's declaration stretched across the galaxy like a held breath.
In Council chambers throughout known space, representatives of ancient civilizations sat frozen in disbelief.
On the Nexus station, elite guards who had never known defeat found themselves staring up at a single human who had just threatened the most powerful military alliance in galactic history. Counselor Vrex was the first to recover his composure, though his voice carried undertones that suggested he was struggling to maintain his legendary calm. "Human, you seem to misunderstand your situation. You may have temporarily gained access to our systems, but you were still alone on a station staffed by 10,000 of our finest warriors. Your success, while unexpected, changes nothing. Marcus examined the control interface more thoroughly, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to process information at speeds that surprised even him. The station's systems were responding to his commands with perfect precision, and what he was discovering made him increasingly confident in his position. Actually, Counselor, I think you're the one who misunderstands the situation. Let me explain what I've learned about your Nexus station in the past few minutes. He activated a holographic display that projected throughout the chamber, showing a detailed schematic of the station's true capabilities. The elite guards below him shifted uncomfortably as classified information appeared before their eyes. This isn't just a defensive installation, is it? According to these schematics, the Nexus station has the ability to project interdiction fields that can prevent faster-than-light travel within a radius of 50 light-years. It can generate gravitational anomalies capable of destroying planets. Most interesting of all, it can manipulate local spacetime to create regions where the fundamental constants of physics operate differently. The projection shifted to show strategic deployments throughout Council space. You've built dozens of these stations, haven't you? Each one positioned to control access to major trade routes, resource-rich systems, and potential threat vectors. This isn't a defense network. It's a control grid designed to ensure that no species can challenge Council authority, no matter how advanced they become. Counselor Zethkri's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation among the Vorthak. The human has gained access to classified military intelligence. This breach cannot be tolerated. Can't it? Marcus asked, his voice carrying the same casual confidence he had used when discussing mission parameters with his SEAL teams. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you have two choices. You can honor the terms of our agreement and grant humanity provisional council membership, or you can try to stop me from leaving this station with what I've learned. The ethereal collective's representative materialized more solidly than Marcus had seen during previous council meetings, its energy form taking on an almost physical presence. The human speaks of leaving as though such a thing were possible. You are surrounded by our finest warriors on a station that exists in a dimension partially removed from normal spacetime. Even if you could defeat our guards, there is no escape. Marcus smiled, and the expression was genuinely amused rather than confident bravado. You know, that's exactly what the Taliban used to say when they had us pinned down in mountain caves. Turns out, humans are pretty good at finding ways out of situations that should be impossible to escape. He activated another section of the control interface, this one connected to the station's dimensional anchoring system. According to these readings, the Nexus station maintains its position by creating a localized spacetime bubble that exists partially outside normal three-dimensional space. Very clever. It makes the station effectively invisible to conventional sensors and immune to most forms of attack. The holographic display showed the complex energy patterns that maintain the station's dimensional displacement. The problem is, it also makes the station completely dependent on these reality anchors. If they were to malfunction, the entire facility would snap back into normal spacetime with considerable force. For the first time since the conversation began, genuine alarm crept into Counselor Vrex's voice. Human, you would not dare. The destruction of this station would kill everyone aboard, including yourself. You're assuming I'm planning to destroy it, Marcus replied, his fingers dancing across control interfaces that had never been designed for human operation. Actually, I have a much better idea. The station's main communication system suddenly activated, broadcasting on frequencies that reached every corner of Council space. But, this time, the transmission wasn't coming from the Council chambers. It was coming directly from the Nexus station's central control core, with Marcus's voice carrying the authority of the galaxy's most powerful weapon. This is Petty Officer Marcus Reeves, speaking on behalf of humanity to all species within Council space. I want you to understand something about the organization that has been ruling your lives for the past several millennia. The holographic display shifted to show the locations of every Nexus station throughout the galaxy. There were 43 of them, positioned to control virtually every aspect of interstellar civilization. Each one represented a choke point that could be used to enforce the Council's will on any species that dared to challenge their authority.
Your council hasn't been protecting you from threats.
They've been protecting themselves from competition.
These stations aren't defensive installations. They're tools of control, designed to ensure that no species can ever grow powerful enough to challenge the existing order.
Throughout Council space, populations that had never questioned their ruler's authority suddenly found themselves staring at evidence of a surveillance and control network that dwarfed anything in their recorded history. On 100 worlds, beings who had thought themselves free realized that their freedom had always been an illusion.
The reaction was immediate and explosive. Emergency sessions convened in planetary governments throughout the galaxy.
Trade guilds that had operated under council oversight for centuries demanded explanations.
Military organizations began questioning orders that had never seemed questionable before.
Counselor Zethkree's voice carried notes of barely controlled panic.
Human, you do not understand the forces you are unleashing. The Council exists to maintain order in the galaxy.
Without our authority, there would be chaos, war, destruction on an unimaginable scale. Marcus had heard similar arguments during counterinsurgency operations on Earth. They always came from people who confused control with stability, who believed that freedom was too dangerous for ordinary citizens to handle.
Maybe, he said.
Or maybe the galaxy would be just fine without a shadow government pulling strings from behind the scenes.
But, here's the thing, Counselor. That's not really my decision to make.
He activated the station's defensive grid, but, instead of targeting external threats, he began broadcasting the complete technical specifications for Nexus station construction and operation. Every classified detail, every hidden capability, every secret weakness was suddenly available to any species with the technological capability to understand it.
I'm giving everyone in the galaxy the same information I have.
The same capabilities your council has been using to maintain their monopoly on power.
Let's see what happens when the playing field is level. The effect was immediate and devastating to council authority.
Species that had submitted to council rule for millennia suddenly realized they had the technical knowledge to build their own reality manipulation devices. Civilizations that had been classified as too primitive for council membership discovered that they were being deliberately held back by technologies that could have advanced their development by thousands of years. But Marcus wasn't finished. He activated the station's temporal communication system, a device that allowed messages to be sent backward through time within a limited range.
The message he transmitted was brief but would fundamentally alter galactic history.
He sent the complete technical specifications for Nexus station technology to every major civilization in the galaxy, not just in the present, but to their past selves 50 years ago.
The temporal paradox began propagating immediately.
Throughout Council space, civilizations that had been subjugated for millennia suddenly had access to advanced technology decades before they had encountered the Council. The balance of power that had remained stable for thousands of years began shifting in ways that made traditional spacetime seem like a calm ocean compared to the temporal storm Marcus had just unleashed. On the station, the elite guards were no longer focused on capturing him. They were receiving emergency communications from their homeworlds as populations that had never questioned council authority suddenly demanded explanations for why their technological development had been artificially restricted. Counselor Vrex's voice, when it came, sounded like the death rattle of an empire.
Human, what have you done? Marcus looked around the chamber at the elite guards who now represented civilizations dealing with revolutionary upheaval.
Many of them were receiving recall orders as their governments collapsed or transformed beyond recognition. The galaxy that had existed an hour ago was already becoming history.
What I've done, Counselor, is exactly what humans always do when faced with impossible odds. I've changed the rules of the game.
The Nexury units that had been pursuing him earlier materialized at the edge of the chamber, but their mechanical precision seemed somehow uncertain.
Even their cybernetic enhancements couldn't help them process a situation that existed outside all known parameters.
Analysis suggests, the lead Nexury announced, that human has initiated cascade failure of galactic political structure.
Recommend immediate containment protocols.
Too late for that, Marcus replied. He was already activating the station's evacuation systems, opening portal gateways that connected to major population centers throughout the galaxy. I'm giving everyone who wants to leave the chance to get out before this place becomes a battlefield." The elite guards looked at each other with expressions that transcended species barriers. They were all professional warriors, but they had just watched a single human dismantle a galactic civilization using nothing but their own weapons and their own arrogance. Some of them began moving toward the evacuation portals. Others seemed frozen by the magnitude of what they were witnessing. A few appeared to be preparing for a final assault, though whether they were motivated by duty or simple desperation was unclear. Marcus activated the station's self-destruct sequence, but with a 60-minute delay that would give everyone time to evacuate. He wasn't interested in genocide, he was interested in revolution. "This is my final communication to the Galactic Council," he announced through the station's communication system. "Humanity's application for membership is hereby withdrawn. We're not interested in joining your organization. We're interested in replacing it." The portal gateway that would take him back to human space shimmered into existence near the central control crystal. But, before stepping through it, Marcus turned to address the elite guards who were still staring at him in disbelief. "You're all welcome to come with me if you want. Where we're going, being the best warrior of a dead empire isn't going to count for much. But, being someone who's willing to build something new? That might be exactly what the galaxy needs." Several of the guards, including 2 of the Nexary units, moved toward the portal. Others remained frozen, unable to process the choice between certain destruction and uncertain freedom. Marcus stepped through the gateway and found himself back aboard the transport ship Endeavor, where Ambassador Chen and Captain Rodriguez were staring at him as though he had materialized from thin air. "Mission accomplished," he said, settling into a chair as though he had just returned from a routine training exercise. "Though I should probably mention that things got a little more complicated than we originally planned." Ambassador Chen was staring at the readings on her communication console, which showed incoming messages from hundreds of civilizations throughout the galaxy. "Marcus, what exactly did you do in there?" Marcus smiled, and, for the first time since accepting the mission, he looked genuinely relaxed. "Ma'am, I did what SEALs do best. I improvised, adapted, and overcame. Though I should probably warn you that we're going to need a much bigger diplomatic corps pretty soon." Behind them, the Nexus station exploded in a cascade of temporal energy that sent ripples through spacetime itself. The age of council dominance was ending, and the age of galactic democracy was about to begin. The question was whether humanity was ready to lead a revolution that would reshape the galaxy forever. 6 months after the destruction of the first Nexus station, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed space station New Geneva, watching as ships from a dozen different species approached through the void. The station hung in neutral space, exactly equidistant from the major population centers of what had once been Council territory. It was humanity's first attempt at building something that could serve as a meeting place for the new galactic community that was emerging from the ashes of the old order. The ships approaching were unlike anything that had existed during the Council era. Where Council vessels had been designed according to strict species-specific patterns, these new ships showed the influence of shared technology and cooperative engineering. A Vorthack transport showed clear signs of human stealth modifications. A Kornathi battleship had incorporated ethereal energy manipulation systems. Most remarkably, a human exploration vessel displayed the flowing organic curves that marked it as partially grown rather than built, using biotechnology shared by a species that had never been allowed to develop under Council oversight. Quite a view, isn't it? Ambassador Chen joined him at the viewport, her diplomatic uniform replaced by the practical jumpsuit that had become standard aboard the station. The formality that had characterized Council-era diplomacy had largely disappeared, replaced by a more direct approach that humans seemed to excel at. Marcus nodded, though his expression remained thoughtful. "It's incredible what they've accomplished in just 6 months. Some of these species have advanced their technology by centuries since they gained access to the information we released. Any regrets about how we handled things?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering the question. The destruction of the Council's control network had indeed created chaos on a galactic scale. Several species had used their newly acquired technology to settle old grievances with their neighbors. Others had collapsed into civil war as populations that had been artificially unified under Council pressure split along natural cultural lines. But there had also been unprecedented cooperation. Species that had been kept isolated from each other for millennia were sharing knowledge and resources.
Scientific advances that would have taken centuries were happening in months. Most importantly, the galaxy's younger civilizations were no longer being held back by artificial restrictions on their development.
No, Marcus said finally. The Council called their system order, but it was really just sophisticated oppression.
Sometimes you have to burn down the old structure before you can build something better. Through the station's communication system, they could hear the opening remarks of the Galactic Assembly's third session.
Unlike the Council, which had been limited to 12 ancient species, the Assembly was open to any civilization that could demonstrate basic principles of cooperation and peaceful coexistence. The current session included representatives from over 200 species, many of which had never been acknowledged as sentient under the old system. Attention, delegates, came the voice of Secretary General Keiko Tanaka, a former UN diplomat who had been elected to lead the assembly by a coalition that included both former Council species and newly emerged civilizations. We have several critical issues to address today, beginning with the proposal to establish joint exploration teams for the galactic frontier regions. Marcus and Ambassador Chen made their way to the assembly chamber, where the debates reflected the new reality of galactic politics. Instead of ancient species dictating terms to younger civilizations, there were complex negotiations between equals who were all struggling to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances.
The Vorthac representative, Councillor Zethkree, was addressing the assembly.
The former council member had adapted to the new order better than most of his colleagues, perhaps because the Vorthac's hive mind mentality made them naturally inclined toward cooperative solutions. The exploration proposal has merit, Zethkree was saying, his mandibles clicking with what Marcus had learned to recognize as genuine enthusiasm rather than the dismissive amusement of the old days. However, we must ensure that newly discovered species are approached with the principles of voluntary contact and technological sharing that define our new compact. The response came from Ambassador Clara of the Sci-Fi Commonwealth, a species that had been classified as pre-industrial under Council oversight but had revealed remarkable technological capabilities once freed from artificial restrictions. The Sci-Fi agree with the principle, but we propose that contact teams include at least one representative from a species that has experienced forced subjugation under the old system. This will help ensure that we do not unconsciously repeat the mistakes of our predecessors.
Marcus smiled as he listened to the debate.
The careful formality of Council-era diplomacy had been replaced by passionate but respectful argument between beings who genuinely seemed to care about finding the best solutions rather than simply maintaining their existing advantages.
Sir?
Marcus turned to see Captain Sarah Walsh, who had been promoted to serve as military liaison for the Assembly's security forces.
We're receiving a priority transmission from the frontier sectors. You're going to want to see this.
The three of them made their way to the station's command center, where a holographic display showed a star map of the galaxy's outer rim. Blinking red indicators marked the locations of several phenomena that hadn't existed 6 months earlier.
What are we looking at, Captain? Ambassador Chen asked.
Unknown energy signatures appearing in previously empty space, Captain Walsh replied.
Our long-range sensors are detecting artificial structures that seem to be materializing out of nowhere. Marcus studied the display with growing concern. How many locations? 17 confirmed, with more appearing every day.
The energy readings are consistent with the reality manipulation technology that powered the Nexus stations, but the scale is much larger. A new voice joined the conversation as Dr. Rebecca Hayes materialized via holographic projection from her research station near Earth.
I've been analyzing the data from our frontier observation posts.
The structures appear to be emerging from what I can only describe as pocket dimensions.
It's as if entire civilizations are stepping sideways into our reality. Ambassador Chen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's environmental controls. Are you saying we've attracted the attention of something from outside our normal spacetime?
Dr. Hayes nodded grimly. The temporal disruption Marcus created when he transmitted information backward through time seems to have created ripples that extend beyond our galaxy.
We've essentially sent a signal into the cosmic void announcing that reality manipulation technology is available here.
Marcus was studying the star map with the same intensity he had once used to analyze terrorist strongholds.
Captain, what's our current defensive capability?
The assembly has 47 ships equipped with modified Nexus technology, along with defense installations at 12 major population centers. It's impressive by pre-council standards, but nothing compared to what the original council could deploy at their peak.
And these unknown contacts?
Captain Walsh highlighted one of the red indicators. This structure alone appears to be larger than our entire fleet. We're detecting energy emissions that suggest it could manipulate spacetime on a galactic scale.
The command center fell silent as the implications became clear.
The destruction of the Council's control network had indeed freed the galaxy's species to develop their full potential. But it had also made them vulnerable to threats that the Council's isolation had protected them from.
Options? Marcus asked. Ambassador Chen was already pulling up communication protocols. We could attempt diplomatic contact.
Try to establish peaceful relations with whoever is emerging from these pocket dimensions. Dr. Hayes shook her head. The energy patterns suggest these aren't naturally evolved civilizations.
These are beings who have learned to exist partially outside normal reality. Our concepts of diplomacy might not apply.
Captain Walsh highlighted several strategic positions on the star map. Military option would be to establish defensive perimeters around major population centers while we develop countermeasures to their technology.
Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering their options.
Then, he did something that would have been impossible during the Council era. He opened a general communication channel to the entire assembly. All delegates, this is Marcus Reeves. We have a situation that requires immediate collective decision-making.
Please report to the main assembly chamber for emergency session.
20 minutes later, representatives from over 200 species were gathered in the chamber, listening as Dr. Hayes explained the threat emerging from the galactic frontier.
The debate that followed was unlike anything that had occurred during the Council era.
Species that had been mortal enemies under the old system collaborated on defensive strategies. Civilizations that had never spoken to each other before shared technological innovations that might prove crucial. Most importantly, everyone participated as equals in deciding how to respond to a threat that endangered the entire galaxy. The ethereal representative, who had adapted to the new order by manifesting in more solid form than ever before, floated at the center of the chamber.
The assembly faces its first true test. Do we respond to this threat as separate species protecting separate interests, or do we respond as a unified galactic civilization?
The Kornathi delegate, whose people had been among the most militaristic under the Council system, surprised everyone by advocating for a diplomatic approach. The Kornathi have learned that strength without wisdom leads to destruction. We propose that first contact be attempted before any military response is considered. Ambassador Clara of the Silithi stood to address the assembly. The species that have emerged from forced subjugation understand something that the old council never did. True strength comes from cooperation, not domination. We support attempts at peaceful contact, but we also support preparing for the possibility that diplomacy may fail. The debate continued for hours, with species after species contributing ideas, resources, and perspectives that would have been impossible under the Council's rigid hierarchy. Finally, Secretary General Tanaka called for a vote on the proposal that had emerged from the collective discussion. All in favor of attempting diplomatic contact with the frontier entities while simultaneously preparing coordinated defensive measures? The vote was unanimous. Marcus found himself appointed to lead the contact team, a position that reflected both his role in the Council's destruction and his unique ability to think outside conventional parameters. The team included representatives from 12 species, each contributing specialized knowledge that might prove crucial in communicating with beings who existed partially outside normal reality. As the team prepared to depart for the frontier, Marcus stood once again on the observation deck of New Geneva, watching as the most advanced ship the galaxy had ever produced prepared for humanity's most important mission since his infiltration of the Nexus Station. Ambassador Chen joined him one final time before departure. Any predictions about what we'll find out there? Marcus smiled, and his expression carried the same confidence that had sustained him during his impossible mission to prove humanity's worth. Ma'am, I learned something during my years as a SEAL that applies to galactic diplomacy just as much as it does to military operations.
What's that?
The universe has a way of throwing challenges at you that seem impossible to overcome. But humans have one advantage that no other species seems to understand. We're too stubborn to admit that anything is actually impossible. He looked out at the stars that now represented not a vast emptiness to be feared, but a frontier of possibilities to be explored by species working together as equals. 6 months ago, the galaxy was controlled by beings who thought they knew everything about what was possible. Today, we're about to make contact with entities that exist outside our understanding of reality itself.
Tomorrow?
He paused, considering the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. Tomorrow, we'll figure out how to make friends with them, or we'll figure out how to stop them if they're hostile.
Either way, we'll do it together.
As the contact ship Endeavour 2 departed for the galactic frontier, it carried with it the hopes and dreams of a galaxy that had learned to see differences as strengths rather than threats.
The age of council dominance was over.
The age of galactic cooperation had begun. And, somewhere in the vast emptiness between galaxies, ancient beings who had watched civilizations rise and fall for eons were about to discover something they had never encountered before, a species that refused to accept that anything was impossible, backed by allies who had learned that cooperation was the greatest force multiplier in the universe.
The council had laughed at humanity once. They weren't laughing anymore.
And neither was anything else in the cosmos that might mistake humanity's diplomatic approach for weakness. The universe was about to get a lot more interesting.